The first candidate we have is Jeffery Felton. He has over 25 years of human services experience in various capacities. He has a bachelor's of arts in psychology with a minor in biology, a master's in clinical psychology. He has worked in various capacities from an assistant director up to an executive director of a children's services facility. In fact, he was an executive director for Mahoning County Children's Services Board.
As Laura said, my name is Jeff Felton. Personally, I've been married 35 years, thanks to my wife. I have 3 children. One recently got married, about a year ago got married, and I have one grandson who is about 2 3/4 years old, and he is such a joy. Those of you who have grandchildren know what I'm talking about, and those of you who don't, you're in for a treat in the future. I have given hundreds of presentations to friendly audiences and not so friendly audiences. Hopefully you are in the friendly category. But other than today, the most nervous I think I've been was a presentation I gave to my son's kindergarten class when he was in school about child abuse prevention. And I was thinking to myself, what is he going to say about comfortable touches, uncomfortable touches in my family? So bear with me if I appear a little nervous. The question that we were asked to address is, why are we the best candidate or the most qualified candidate for this position? The board and the decision makers will determine whether or not I or the other finalists are the best suited candidate for this position. But just to give you a sense of who I am and where I've come from, I've worked in several states. Most of my child welfare career, nearly 30 years now, almost hate to say that, has been in Ohio and in Pennsylvania. At one point, I was the youngest director of a county children's services board. I was barely 30 years old. Thought I was going to set the world on fire, thought I knew a lot. I think day one on the job, I realized how much I did not know. But I bring with me a breadth and a depth of child welfare practice in general, but also specific to Ohio. I'm real familiar, I can't recite specifically Ohio Revised Code or Administrative Code, but I'm real familiar with the guidelines, rules and laws that govern our practice in the state of Ohio. And with my experience in other counties in Ohio as well as other states, I can draw on that experience. Other counties, other states do things a little bit differently that we may be able to utilize as we move our practice forward. I am a data-driven person. I had a professor in college once say to me, because my training is in very behavioral, theoretical orientation in terms of clinical psychology. And he said, we do not practice cardiac psychology. I know in my heart I'm doing good work. Is that we need the data to show that what we're doing is really making a difference, in our case, in the lives of children and families. So I'm kind of hard-headed when it comes to that, but I also have a very soft heart. We need to treat people kindly with respect and dignity. I have a track record of standing behind decisions that the agency makes. We are one agency, we speak with one voice. Some of the agencies I've worked with in the past, the fear, especially when somebody new is coming in, is, am I going to get thrown under the bus if something goes wrong? And my response to that question is, as long as we operate under the guidelines of policy and practice, and you tell us what's going on, tell me what's going on, don't hide any information. The agency is the one who makes a decision or a recommendation, not an individual staff person. And as such, we stand behind the decisions that the agencies make. Mistakes get made, things go wrong. We're not perfect. But we have to stand, and it's my belief and responsibility. I have to stand behind the decisions that the agency makes and be accountable for those. I had a former staff person tell me just a few weeks ago, I was doing an evaluation on a client that she had seen. She said, I really miss you, Jeff. She says, I remember those days where I could argue with you and fight with you and tell my side of the story about why we should do what we should do, and you would make a decision, sometimes not the decision that I would want to make. And then 5 minutes later, you would see me walking down the hall and ask me how I was doing, say hello, and so forth, and that I would not hold any grudges. And unfortunately, that does not appear to be the case in the agency that I left. But I'll argue and fight like crazy, but I don't hold any grudges. Some of the things that I value that are important to me: excellence in our practice, excellence in everything that we do. Inclusion. It comes from the belief that the people who are best positioned to make decisions are those who are closest to the issues. I can make decisions about how we should structure our reception area, but without including the person who does that job day in and day out, most of the decisions I make will be not good ones, not the best ones. So I believe and value in inclusion. And expect staff to participate in decisions to better the agency and better our practice. I also value kindness. That's that soft-hearted part to me. Respect and dignity, that we have to treat each other with respect and dignity, our clients, community members with respect and dignity. And we have to model that. As managers or leaders or as a director of an agency, I can't chastise a staff person in front of other people and then turn around and expect them to be kind and treat clients with the respect and dignity that I say that they should be treated. So I believe that we are models in how we treat each other. That should model very closely how we treat our clients. Accountability and personal responsibility. We need to stand up for the decisions that we make. We make the best decisions we can at the time, knowing what we know, and we need to own those decisions. Good decisions and bad decisions. Sometimes it's hard to take credit for good things that we do, but it's a little bit easier to take blame for the bad things that happen. I do not see this in this agency, but I can tell you I've been in many agencies where we have adopted a victim mentality. Poor us, nobody understands what we have to deal with, how hard our job is, nobody appreciates what we do. All we do is get criticized. And that victim mentality does not go very well. So that's one of the things I do not value. We are professionals in our field. We know what we're doing. And we need to act like we know what we're doing. We need to be leaders in the field of child abuse and neglect, family services, because we really are the experts. Professionalism, risk-taking, cooperation with other agencies. We are not alone in serving kids and families. We need other people. Just like, again, as a young parent, I was so proud. I'm raising my child on my own, my wife and I, until I realized, oh, geez, if my mother-in-law didn't babysit, what would I be able to do? Or if my mother didn't step forward and buy formula and diapers and things like that. And that we really are all interdependent, that we cannot expect people to do the things that they need to do alone. We are social creatures, and we need each other. Families need other families, other community members, and we need each other. We need staff, we need board members, we need everybody who is in this business together. A couple other values: honesty, even when the news isn't the news that we want to hear. And transparency. It kind of goes back to owning and being accountable for the decisions that we make. We are a public agency. We have to be good stewards of the public dollar. If we want people to participate in our endeavor and our mission and our vision, we need to be open, honest, and transparent. Some of the basic beliefs insofar as child welfare is concerned: our kids are growing up very, very quickly. We may have a child who comes into care at a year old, and before we blink our eyes, and as an older person, I will tell you, time goes by more and more quickly as you get older. They're all of a sudden 2 and 3 years old. Now they're 4 times older than they were when they came into care. So we have to have a sense of urgency about what we do. We can't wait. Our kids can't wait for us to act. I also believe that the families are the best experts in their own families. I tell my staff, families know more about themselves than we'll ever know, or we'll ever think that we know. So let's not pretend that we know what makes a family do what they do. And we have to honor that, just as we would expect and hope that somebody would honor our expertise about our own family, and that we know that they care about the welfare of all their family members. I mentioned before about problem solving is best suited to those who are closest to the issues. I also believe that we need balance in our lives. This is work. It's very important, and it's a mission, and it's a calling for some people. But it's work. We have families out there. We have other lives. And as the director and as leaders in this agency, we need to make sure that there's that family and work-life balance. We expect that of our clients, right? If your child is sick, take them to the doctor. If they need you to be with them, be with them. So we can't turn around and say, well, if your child is sick, just because you're a staff person, you shouldn't be with them. So we need to achieve that balance, and I have to create an environment that allows us to achieve that family work-life balance. I think lastly, and once I get rolling, I can go on and on and on, and I won't bore you with that. But we always, always, always need to do what's best, not what's easiest. Kids, we know children grow up best in families. Families need the support of each other and their communities. And we need to partner with those communities and neighborhoods to make sure that the families receive the services and support that they need. So why am I the best candidate or the best suited candidate for the position? That's a decision that other people will make. I can tell you that my heart and my soul is in child welfare. I believe in what our agencies, because I'm currently in an agency, what we do. And we can always do better. And my job, I was looking through the website today, looking at the previous directors, and early directors were here for a long time, and then there was a period where each director was here 4 or 5 years, and then I looked at Mr. Sparks, and he's been here 18 years, I think. I think, wow, what huge shoes to fill. And my technical assistant specialist, Nancy Soldner, as she read the daily clips and my name was in there, she says, you or whomever is going to have really, really big shoes to fill. So I would like to honor not only Dean's service, but your all service to this agency and the community, and hope as it moves forward that I would be part of that. So thank you. My brother is a carpenter, so as I left and I had some severance from Hamilton County, I really just kind of worked with him and trying to figure out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it during that time. And was doing some private practice, but on a smaller basis, limited basis. My degree is in clinical psychology, so I work with a psychologist in Washington, Pennsylvania.
Well, okay, so then your time period in Hamilton County was short. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. When I left Washington County, Pennsylvania, Washington County Children and Youth Services, I had 2 opportunities presented to me. One was in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, and the second one was in Hamilton County. I was offered both of those positions, kind of the assistant director for children's services. The Job and Family Services agencies in Hamilton County is similar to the Department of Social Services structure in North Carolina. I chose Hamilton County because their leadership staff was intact. Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, most of my colleagues' positions were vacant, and it's really important for me to determine whether or not I fit into the leadership team in the agency. And since most of the leadership team was vacant, it was really hard for me to make that decision. Not so in Hamilton County. My first day on the job, maybe the second day on the job in Hamilton County, the fiscal officer says to me, so what do you think of this federal audit that shows we owe $1.4 billion back to the federal and state government? And I said, ooh, I did not know that. So I should have done a better job at researching that. So we, as the agency, went from 7 assistant directors really down to 1, and even the finance director ended up moving to the county. So as part of that, part of it, they say, was due to public financing of Paul Brown Stadium and Great American Ballpark, and how are they going to make those bond payments and so forth. as well as a lot of the levy monies that were generated were going to support the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's office for security, and so forth. So had knowing what I know now, I would have dealt with a leadership team that I didn't know who they were. But yeah, it was a significant financial issue down there that caused, and they still really only have their PR person, a director, assistant director, and a PR person, so they didn't go back to that. So that's what happened there.
Okay. Can I go one more?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll stop. So then, I guess my next question is about how you're able to do program administration in Huron County and private practice in Washington, PA.
I usually do my private practice, and it's just evaluations on Saturdays. A lot of my practice is not ongoing counseling. One of the things I've been specializing in is psychological evaluations for chronic back pain patients who are considering a spinal cord stimulator implant. The insurance companies require a psychological evaluation before they can proceed with that implant. So I make sure there's no psychoses. People aren't thinking that the government is spying on them. Again, a bad idea to implant an electronic device in their back if they think the government's spying on them. So that's what I usually do. An occasional, Pennsylvania has wraparound services in the behavioral health framework, and they require evaluations. Usually the prescriptions for those in-home services last about 6 months, and they need a subsequent evaluation. I occasionally get custody evaluations, and when I was doing that more, we did bonding assessments and so forth for the court and for the agency. That is a part of my life that I would like to stop doing and be able to devote my weekends entirely to my wife and grandson. Not necessarily in that order, but usually in that order. If you ask my wife, it's in that order, my wife and my grandson.
My question is more of an extension of Dr. Togar's questions, because those are the same concerns that I noted also. But in addition, I noticed that, for example, you still have your private practice in Washington, Pennsylvania, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you are currently, your current place of employment is in Norwalk, Ohio, but you live in Parma. Is that correct?
No.
That's not correct.
It may have been correct when I submitted. When I moved up there, it's like, where am I going to live and so forth? Because my house and my family, my wife still works, so she still lives in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. That's kind of the permanent address.
I'm sorry, you tailed off on that?
That's kind of the permanent address of our family. She cares for her mother who had a stroke, and we don't feel that it's the best idea to move her right now. So I stayed with a sister of mine who was struggling with cancer. So I kind of took care of the house and so forth, and was a companion for her until she passed away just in February. So I'm currently living, my current address is in Milan, which is just a couple miles north of Norwalk.
Okay, I'm glad you clarified that, because I just thought that there were some significant commutes. There's like 50 miles from Parma to Huron County.
Yeah,
250 miles to
Oh,
Washington, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And I also noticed that you have the practice in Pennsylvania and you work in Ohio, but you have a West Virginia driver's license.
Yeah. It's sometimes I don't know if I'm coming or going, but I think, and that part of that is how I view what we do. We do what we need to do. Family's important. I want to keep those connections. I am kind of longing for that kind of permanent home. I want to be in a place that is my community. And being there during the week is really nice. Now, there are advantages of not living in that community, although my children are now, some of my staff say, how are their children going to react when a classmate comes to them and says, your mommy took my kid, or my brother, or my sister, or my nephew, or something like that. But that hasn't really proven to be a significant barrier in terms of being part of that community and being part of the fabric of the community. The partnerships and so forth that we do, I think, are important, and they see me as part of the community. And they say, why are you driving home every weekend? And I say, to see my wife, and which is not a bad reason to drive
So
home.
if you were selected for the position here in Toledo, in Lucas County, you would be vested and interested in
Absolutely.
relocating to
Lucas County would be my home.
Hi, my name's Jane Moore, and I'm a board member approach, or what philosophy do you have on balancing looking inward to make sure the staff and the machinery is working versus outward and building relationships with others in the community, both individually, institutions, other agencies?
That's an excellent question. As the director of an agency, they look at that person as the face and voice of the agency. However, we need to be mindful that we're not always going to be around here. It may take 4 years, it may take 18 years, but we have a duty to prepare others to take on those responsibilities, that legacy building and succession planning, rather. So I try to encourage my staff to get out in the community along with me to make sure that the community sees not just me, although I'm the primary person, but they see other people. Because if I go on vacation, or if I run a marathon, or if I do something, I want to make sure that the agency is in really good hands and that somebody is not waiting for me to come back necessarily to get an answer. But it takes a balancing act. The person I replaced in Washington County, Pennsylvania, she was very concerned about having a statewide presence. And in my way, that was important, but what the agency needed at the time was really a lot of time and focus internally. So they felt neglected. They felt that there was an absence of her leadership while she was at the state level. So the house is crumbling back home, and she's talking at a different level. I would need to kind of assess where we are. I looked at the outcome measures for Lucas County as one of the 5 metro counties, and we really are. You are superior in terms of those performance measures compared to any other metro county. Again, we can always do better, and that would be my challenge. So it is that balancing act. People want to do that. I think people want to engage the community. I want to make sure that I can engage the community with my leadership team and staff, because they're out there. You guys are out there. If you're caseworkers every day, you're interfacing with the community much more sometimes than I would be if I'm in my office. And lastly, I guess just on a case-by-case basis, I've always been very, very afraid of losing sight of what we do. Change is one of those things that always occurs around us, but our mission and vision should be constant, protecting kids and building strong families and supporting families. So I tell my staff I could stay in my office all day long and not see anybody. I have enough work to do. But that takes me several steps away from who we serve. So I always try to watch a visit, talk to staff, talk to parents who are in for visits, and how are we doing, how are we going, how can we do things better so that they know who they can talk to. But it is a challenge. In some of my experiences, there's a lot of task force and so forth, and in some of the counties it was the same group of people would meet here, and the same group then for a different topic over here. So you end up meeting with the same people over and over again about different topic areas. But to include staff, as I mentioned in what I value, inclusion and so forth, when it's appropriate to do that, and ask for the staff to be included and to volunteer.
I was really thinking about your reference in your opening remarks about this agency can't do it by themselves, and you have to be, we're interdependent with other agencies, whether it's mental health or 100 other agencies. And I really mean like balancing the time of focusing inward or making sure those relationships are strong so they can help you, you can help them, because we probably are serving the same family.
Oh, absolutely. It's probably the same families are taking the majority of services from all of our agencies, from mental health, from the court, from children's services, and so forth. Part of my kind of leadership philosophy and belief is really, I kind of alluded to it when I talked about interdependence, Stephen Covey, and talking about the 7 habits of highly effective people, beginning with the end in mind and to all the way to sharpening the saw. But he talks about interdependence is the highest level of social maturity, where we can do more together through that synergy than we can alone. But it takes time to foster those relationships. As I tell folks, it's easy for strangers to make mistakes. It's much harder for friends to make mistakes. We kind of forgive them. And it takes time to develop those relationships with all of our partners, not just at my level, but at everybody's level.
Joe DeStazio, I work in the intake department, and I also have another role as the union president. Can you share with us your experiences working with unions or folks under collective bargaining? And if so, how do you view them as working as a partner?
Okay. In Washington County, we had a union. In Belmont County, it was not a union and it became union. In Mahoning County, we had a union. In the shop where I currently am, it's a union shop. I believe, number one, that a lot of the issues the noise that gets created in any partnership, like with CASA, I'm assuming there's a CASA program in Toledo, stems from the lack of saying out loud that we share common goals. So the union, as representing the staff, you want, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume you want staff to make a decent wage so that they can support their families. You want adequate resources so you can do the job, so you can see families and serve families and protect families, right? You want to be treated fairly, okay? You want everybody to be treated fairly. I don't know if you want everybody to be treated the same. I think there's a difference between treating everybody the same because we all have our own unique needs and things that jazz us up and things that bring us down. But you want to be treated fairly. Those are the same things I want. I want you to be able to do your job. I want you to have the resources to do your job. I want you to be treated fairly. Because when all those things happen, kids and families get served better. Okay? So if you start from that point of commonality, then things become much easier. I had a county, I've sat on negotiating teams for contracts, and a county attorney, because I'm usually not the lead, the county usually has an attorney, and they say, our first offer is going to be a 25% pay reduction. I said, that's so insulting. I mean, we're adults here. Well, let's be honest, open, and genuine, and be reasonable with each other and not play these games. I will say there's some advantages of collective bargaining. It is collective. I can't negotiate individually, and sometimes that's nice not to be put in a position to negotiate with an individual staff person. The rules are pretty clearly defined in our union contract, the terms. We kind of know when we violate those terms either way. In my experiences, I've had more union members attempt to file grievances on other union members than on management. They treated me poorly, they're not doing their job, they didn't do on-call and so forth. I said, well, if it's not in the contract, that's something that you guys are going to have to deal with together. But we can get to where we want to be, because I think we share more than commonalities than we have differences. And I've had ongoing and regular labor management meetings to make sure that those relationships are built, number one, and that they are maintained. I may say your grievance is frivolous, my opinion, if I get to that point. And I expect you not to be insulted with something like that, because I know you're doing your job. And if you don't fight for your employees and your membership, then your kind of butt's on the line for that. So I understand that and respect that.
Mr. Felton, I have a few questions that were collected from various employees and kind of gathered. And the union question was one of the biggest questions or concerns. But in addition to that, there are several questions regarding your experience with levies, with passing levies. And if you could just sort of give us some background on your involvement.
Yeah. I will tell you, I've had experience with levy campaigns. My expertise is not in PR, public relations, but in Belmont County, we had levies. We tried to add or have an additional levy that was not successful. Replacement levies were generally successful. In Mahoning County, before I got to Mahoning County, the levy failed. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember Ray Boom Boom Mancini. He was a boxer. Some of you, okay? So he was the levy chair, kind of that symbolic person, and the levy failed. So we decided to run. I kind of kiddingly said it's not a low-key campaign, but a no-key campaign. I mean, we have to answer questions and so forth. But we didn't go out there with a lot of that kind of pizzazz, and the levy ended up passing. I think we have to remember that it's kind of 50% plus one in the levy fails. But part of that comes from kind of our being responsive and transparent to the community. I know that the most recent levy was unsuccessful. I don't think a decision has been made yet by the team of folks who decide to put levies on the ballot to go back on the ballot. But there were circumstances, I think, from a little bit of a distance that had less to do with the performance of the agency and the need, and I think people just needed to speak up and say their mind. But it's hard. My boss says to me, because she knows I'm here, she says, "Do you really want to go to a county with a levy because you're going to be spending most of your time doing levy types of work?" And I understand that. But I also understand that if you do crappy work, you're not going to get anything passed. So a lot of my focus is making sure that we do good basic children's services. And I know this agency does that. And to be out there kind of moving the agency forward. But it's a tough business. And one nice thing about a larger community is there are people in the community that have that expertise that I don't. And I am not bashful admitting that I don't have that kind of public relations mentality. I can deal with the media really well. I'm open and honest and so forth with the media. But when it comes to convincing somebody, like I'm trying to convince you all today that I'm the best candidate, that's probably, I am suited, probably my skills in other areas. But we are all part of it. I had a staff person one time say, "I'm not voting for our levy." A staff person saying that they're not voting for the levy that helps pay your salary. I said, what is going on here? So it really didn't kind of take me aback and talk to me about this, because if she's saying that, I'm sure there's a lot of other people out in the community saying that. So we have to be sensitive to that, not just during election season. We have to be sensitive to how the public perceives this, and are they getting the value, and are we good stewards of the public dollar? Every day, not just election season.
So taking it one step further from what you have just said, going forward, what would you do differently from past experiences with levy campaigns to ensure the success of a levy campaign with Lucas County Children's Services, knowing that this is a great agency and we do great work, and I think the community knows that. So how do you pass a levy with all of that in mind after one just failed?
I guess the first part is really documenting and justifying the need for that. These are the things that the levy dollar does support. This is where we are as an agency relative to where we were maybe before, as well as other similar sized agencies. I had a very successful politician say to me, your levy sign needs to be straightforward, stop child abuse, or just a clear, consistent message. And those are the folks that I would go to and say, what do we need to do? Ultimately, I think that the first group that needs to be convinced is the board or commission that decides whether or not levies go on the ballot. Without their support, number one, you're not going to get there. And I can speak pretty confidently that one of the issues that caused the levy to fail is going to be a moot issue, I think, moving forward, if that was the sole issue. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way. It's just the way it is. And I think despite one of the reasons, at least publicly, it did not seem to pass, there were a lot of good things that were out there in the press and the media as well. It's a solid agency. They do good work. They need this money. But here is kind of a protest. So it's a challenge, a task. It's not an easy thing to do. And when I talk to my colleagues in other states, they say to me, you guys are crazy in Ohio. You have to have voters pass school levies and child welfare levies and fire levies and so forth. Pennsylvania, for example, the county commissioners just set the millage. School boards in Pennsylvania say we need X number of dollars. this is what the property tax is going to be. And if you're upset as a voter, then you get a new school board member in there. So they look at Ohio and say, you guys are crazy.
And then I have one additional question that I want to, and maybe just a brief answer because I know we're running short on time, but there was a question from several people regarding concerns in the community regarding the reduction in foster homes, and how would you address that reduction, and what steps would you take to try to increase the number of foster homes that we have in the community?
Okay. Well, part of it's hard to address that specific thing without talking about my philosophy. My agency, we have created what we refer to as a universal worker model. So we don't have an intake department, we don't have ongoing services, we don't have foster care. One worker gets the case from beginning, and if it's closed at assessment or investigation, it's closed. If they go into foster care, they keep that to adoption. So it goes from beginning to end. I said before, we want to do what's best, maybe not what's easy. It takes a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, and so forth to do that. With that, we have a strong family finding. Huron County, people stay around, probably like Lucas. You have families generation to generation. And I have staff say, well, it would be easier for me if I just put this child in a foster home, but there's a grandmother 2 hours away. I said, well, I don't really care what's easiest, what is best. So I would want to really look at the agency and are we utilizing kinship care? Are we utilizing relatives as well as we can? Notwithstanding some tragedies that occurred down in Hamilton County where a child's placed with a grandparent and the mother is in the home and stabs the child to death. Again, that grandmother did not do that to that child. With that, so hopefully as we do that, right now I have, I know you're going to chuckle when I say this, 24 kids in foster care. But at one point in our history, we had 80-some kids in foster care. Now, one unit probably here has that many children in foster care. Our judge does not give us custody of kids when we place with relatives. They give the relative temporary custody. So I will tell you, in addition to those 24 kids, I have another 36 kids who are not with their parents, but are in the temporary custody of relatives. So when you look at out-of-home care, it's one thing. I think too oftentimes we blame the community for the lack of our effectiveness. For example, we don't have enough African American homes. What's wrong with that African American community that they're not stepping forward to care for their kids? And I say, whoa, that's us. That's on us. What are we not doing? And what can we do better to generate that interest? So getting out there, getting out in the communities, being that voice. I never, ever, ever, if I'm doing a presentation to my county commissioners or to a school district on mandated reporting, give up the opportunity or pass up the chance to say, hey, if you're interested, we need more foster parents. We always need more foster parents, even though they may not have any kids in them, in their homes. So always talk about the need for substitute care, and you can make a difference, even if it's caring for the child for a day. How can we do that? Constantly recruiting and training. Most importantly, all the data show the best recruiter of foster homes are foster parents. So are we providing high quality services to our current foster families? And how can we even provide better services? Because they're the ones who are going to go out there and say, you don't want to work for Wood County, you don't want to be a foster parent down there, you want to be a foster parent for Lucas County.
We have one final question.
I know we're pressed for time, but I just want you, if possible, to speak a minute about disproportionality and maybe what are some strategies that you would have in looking and dealing with disproportionality.
I think part of it depends upon where you're looking. When I was in Mahoning County, I looked at, it was probably at that time 17.9% African American population. So when I looked at my foster care population, probably 18-19% were African American. Thinking, we're doing pretty good. However, when I looked at my permanent custody cases, 60% of my PC cases were African American. Thinking, oh my goodness, something's not quite right. So part of the first thing that I would do is, where does that disproportionality exist? Does it exist really in the front door, kinship, and so forth? Or does it show itself later on in the game when we're looking at permanent custody cases? The other is, what is it related to? What is it correlated with? Is it substance abuse? Is it substandard housing? Is it general neglect? Kind of what are the issues that seem to be correlated, and are we addressing those kind of root issues? It is a huge issue in many counties. I didn't look at the data specifically for Lucas County, but we do. And I think sometimes, if we're honest with ourselves and check our values, sometimes we think we can do it better, or they deserve more. So the standard, I think we need to use, this can go into one of those values and belief statements, we need to use our authority judiciously. We have a lot of authority, but if we really know that kids grow best in families, their own families, what are we doing to front load those services to make sure that that happens, so we don't need those foster homes, so we don't have disproportionality? But we also need to own it when it exists too, and try to figure out the causes and try to address it the best we can. I'm one person. You guys are out there doing the work. In many respects, probably with the exception of Mr. Sparks, this position is sometimes the easiest to replace because you guys are out there. You're the ones who really do the work. And you have a lot of creativity and energy and excitement. So I would look to you guys for at least ways to begin to address. Thank you all for the opportunity, and I really do appreciate everything you guys do. There's this thing in the state that as the metros go, so does the state, and you guys are usually lumped into that. And I said, no, you guys are different as a county than the Cuyahogas and Hamiltons, and I'm proud of that just from where I sit, and you all should be really proud of that as well.